Good morning, everybody. Let's try this again. This is a live update this morning on the tropics as potential is increasing for tropical cyclone development with 97L. You can see that the probabilities have been increased to high here by the National Hurricane Center, and both of these waves are tracking towards the Caribbean Sea, so we need to keep a very close eye on these. Some of the models are showing 97L to enter the Gulf of Mexico middle to later portion of next week and pose a threat anywhere from Louisiana to Florida. Some of those models are even showing a recurving storm, but the National Hurricane Center is recognizing the slow organization of 97L, and it does look like it could become a tropical storm in the next 24 hours. You can see this is the more organized storm. Look at the spin there, the cyclonic spin. Almost looks like you could see a closed spin there with this system, which would indicate a tropical depression forming. And it does look like I'm having, again, some issues with this internet. And we are back. Connection is successful. That is good news. Does appear that we are back live. So this system here we are watching, and if this does develop closed rotation, then that'll become a tropical depression. This lead wave right now is bringing some heavy rain and gusty winds to portions of the Lesser Antilles. Right now this is just an open easterly wave, and it becomes a tropical depression once you can confirm a low-level closed rotation with it. And Hurricane Hunter aircraft will be monitoring 97L here for the development of that close rotation. It is passing to the south of a monster Bermuda High, a subtropical anticyclone off to the north, just off the coast, well off the coast of the Carolinas. And that Bermuda High is so intense that it's going to take both of these systems off to the west-northwest. But it is still way too early to assess any impact to the United States, but it does look like the middle to late portion of next week. We definitely need to keep a very close eye on this. The GFS model especially takes that system into the Gulf of Mexico. And just since my last update, it does look like there is just a bit of a convective explosion relatively close to a center, if there is a center with this tropical wave. At that point, if there is closed rotation within this, then it'll become a tropical depression. And it'll take a convective explosion near the center to decrease that surface pressure just a bit, and that'll cause those winds to then wrap around the center, and then we'll have a closed rotation. It does look like we do have more of an easterly surge, though, with that northern convective element, and that southern convective element looks to be moving a little bit more southwest to northeast. But still looks like this could be an open wave for the time being. But I do expect this to be upgraded to a tropical depression in the next 12 hours or so, a tropical storm in the next 24 hours. And there is a chance that this could even approach hurricane strength on approach to the middle portion of the Lesser Antilles in the middle to later portion of this week. And here is the global ensemble prediction system run alongside the GFS ensemble, and you can see quite a bit of spread still with these forecast tracks, anywhere from becoming a fish storm, recurving off to the north, missing the east coast completely, to a system that enters the Gulf of Mexico, even the central western Gulf of Mexico. And you could definitely see the spread with these models as well, anywhere from a Yucatan impact, northern Mexico, Texas, through the central portion of the Gulf of Mexico, and even recurving. And all of it depends on how far west that Bermuda High is able to expand. It is a very intense Bermuda High, but sometimes they can shimmy a little bit off to the east, and that'll cause these tropical systems to recurve off to the north, whip up the Gulf Stream, and then turn off to the northeast around the northern periphery of that Bermuda High. So all of it depends on how far west that Bermuda High extends. If it extends toward the southeastern U.S., and that'll cause these systems to pass through the Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico, similar to what happened the entire season last year, leading to that record-breaking season in the Gulf of Mexico and the Gulf Coast, with Louisiana having multiple impacts from powerful hurricanes, including Hurricane Zeta that was upgraded to a Category 3 storm, making landfall in the south-central coast. Also Hurricanes Laura and Delta that made landfall within about 15 miles apart. And here you can see the hurricane model intensity forecast for 97L, showing that intensification into a tropical storm in the next 24 hours, maybe reaching a hurricane strength on approach to the central Lesser Antilles. The GFS operational model certainly shows that with 97L by Friday, getting awfully close to the Lesser Antilles. And here are those hurricane model tracks leaning toward the westernmost cluster with the global ensemble prediction system and the GFS in a relatively close agreement with this. The European model takes it a little bit further south, potentially coming pretty close to the Yucatan as a weaker storm. And most of the models now take the lead tropical wave that currently is over the Lesser Antilles and weaken that system quite a bit. But this is what we are monitoring here over the coming days. This weekend, it looks like this system, 97L, could approach the Greater Antilles, getting pretty close to the southern edge of Hispaniola here. And many of the models take it pretty close to Cuba. And the exact track is very crucial here. If it stays to the south of the Greater Antilles, it'll just continue to intensify into the Gulf of Mexico. If it heads right over Hispaniola and Cuba, that'll lead to a weaker storm. That'll also allow it to turn more rapidly off to the north on the western edge of that Bermuda High, potentially missing the east coast completely. But if that Bermuda High, the western lobe of that, is able to expand towards the southeastern U.S., similar to what happened last year, then that'll take this system further south, maybe missing Cuba completely, passing over the lower elevation western edge with a little bit less topography that would be disruptive to this system, and then potentially entering the central or eastern Gulf of Mexico by the middle to later portion of next week. But it's still way too far out to assess any impact on the U.S. But here are those sea surface temperatures. Anything greater than about 28 degrees Celsius is supportive of a tropical cyclone maintenance and intensification. And it does look like the environment out ahead of this system to the south of that monster Bermuda High centered over the North Atlantic does look quite favorable from a shear perspective as well. And some of the forecast models, sea surface temperatures in the tropical Pacific are showing the development of a year 2 La Nina event, which overall would lead to a reduction of the wind shear in the tropical Atlantic and a more favorable hurricane season. And that's part of the factors that are being considered for an above average forecast for the Atlantic tropical cyclone season. And look at how warm the Gulf of Mexico is, especially the western Gulf. So any of those systems that are able to enter the Caribbean, even though we are relatively early in the season, these sea surface temperatures, especially for a low latitude tropical wave coming off Africa, will easily be able to intensify into a hurricane, and that is what it looks like is going to happen with this system. We're also going to discuss the enhanced risk across the northeastern U.S. There is a 2% tornado probability up there, mainly for Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. Mount Washington, you're included in that 2%. Maybe some hail. Wind is the main reason for that upgrade to an enhanced risk, but of course we will be considering that event as well. But I want to show you this Bermuda High that is dominating the tropical Atlantic right now, and really the semi-permanent positioning of that Bermuda High is crucial to determine whether these systems become fish storms and wrap around the western edge of the Bermuda High. If it's able to shimmy a little bit further east toward the central Atlantic, there you can see Bermuda there. That's why it's called a Bermuda High. But the western extension of this Bermuda High is very crucial. If it extends toward the southeastern U.S., that'll cause these waves to head off to the west through the Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico. But this is the main steering mechanism, the easterlies, that will steer both of these systems. This is the lead wave that right now is bringing that heavy rain over the Lesser Antilles that we were just monitoring. And the GFS even completely dissipates that tropical wave as it heads into the Caribbean Sea. But as is, we saw many times last year, these lead waves, even though they'll be a little bit weaker, remember Marco last year in the Gulf of Mexico basically paved the way from a moisture standpoint for the system back behind it, the kicker system, to be more intense, which eventually became Hurricane Laura. So it's almost like this easterly wave is priming the environment out ahead of 97L, and the GFS intensifies this thing into a hurricane as it approaches the central Lesser Antilles by Friday afternoon. Here you can see that big Bermuda High here. A little bit further east, but you can see the extension of this lobe of anticyclonic curvature here off to the west, and that could cause 97L to take a further south track to the south of the Greater Antilles, even to the south of Cuba, and maybe passing into the Gulf of Mexico and into the middle of later portion of next week. But it's still way too early to make any calls on that. And it does look like this Bermuda High heads quite a bit off to the east during the weekend, which could cause this system to turn off to the north or even die over Hispaniola there or the higher elevation of Cuba. This is a 6Z GFS that we're looking at right now. Hopefully the internet is remaining relatively stable here. But this is still way too far out to really look at an exact track. It could be anywhere from over the Bahamas, recurving along the western edge of this Bermuda High, or this lobe of anticyclonic curvature could be strong enough to basically ship 97L across the northern Caribbean and into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Really all we can do is be aware that it's out there, dial in those hurricane safety plans, including evacuation plans along the Gulf of Mexico and even the East Coast. Even though it is relatively early in the season, the tropical Atlantic is coming alive in a big way. And the GFS, definitely the operational GFS, keeps that system off to the south with this strong blocking high, the western lobe of this Bermuda High, blocking that system off to the west. And the environment is also quite favorable for this system to intensify. But if it does head directly over the Greater Antilles, including Cuba and Hispaniola, then it'll be a much different outcome for 97L. But those sea surface temperatures are quite warm here near Cuba and the Greater Antilles and just off to the south. The sea surface temperatures start to warm up a little bit as the system approaches the Lesser Antilles. So it looks like to the west of the Lesser Antilles, it could intensify on approach to the southern coastline of Hispaniola, Dominican Republic, and Haiti during the weekend. And then we'll have to watch it very closely as we go into next week to see if there is that Gulf of Mexico impact. And just for fun, we'll look at the operational GFS, which always shows a pretty aggressive forecast for these tropical systems in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. This system takes it just to the west of Key West through the eastern Gulf of Mexico. But it is reckless as a meteorologist to put any weight on this exact track. This thing could be anywhere from the Yucatan, northern Mexico, coastline of Texas, Louisiana, all the way through Florida to even a recurving fish storm. All of those options are on the table, as is being predicted by the Global Ensemble Forecasting System. European ensembles as well show a relatively weaker storm, but looking at the sea surface temperatures and the shear profiles upstream and that dominant Bermuda High, it does seem like a Gulf of Mexico solution is certainly feasible with this storm system. But boy, the operational European is way different than the GFS as expected, really bringing that wave through the southern Caribbean as a much weaker storm. But I do expect this to be named a tropical depression in the next 24 hours, especially with these little convective blobs that are developing a little closer to the center. As we're going through the day. Normally these convective explosions are amplified during the nighttime, and then during the day you get a little bit of a waning of that convection. But it does look like there is a pretty compact intercorrugating formed here. It'll need to be confirmed, of course, by Hurricane Hunter aircraft. But it does look like this convective element is heading a little bit more north to south, maybe on the western side of a closed circulation. And this convection here is propagating a bit to southwest, northeast in a storm relative sense as well. So it does look like there is a chance of a closed spin beginning to develop, and at that time this will be named a tropical depression. And the hurricane intensity forecasts do show gradual intensification on approach to the Lesser Antilles by the end of the week. But these are the two disturbances that we're watching. The one to the east less organized, less potential for development. The NHC has decreased the probabilities for that wave that is bringing some gusty winds and heavy rainfall, maybe some water spoots to the Lesser Antilles out there, as well as that will pass into the Caribbean. And most of the models are showing that system to weaken with quite a bit of dry air out ahead of it, and increased wind shear. But it could prime the lower environment from a moisture standpoint and prime this air here for 97L to pass into it and potentially increase a lot more. But it is quite a hostile environment out ahead of this lead wave that is passing over the Lesser Antilles at this time. I'm using the Radar Omega app here for tracking, and you can certainly see the cyclonic spin with 97L and why that has a greater likelihood of development. Middle to later portion of next week is when we'll be watching this very closely. Let's take a look at the update here. %60 chance of cyclone formation in the next 48 hours. Greater likelihood over the next 5 days. The National Hurricane Center, a broad area of low pressure associated with a tropical wave, is located about midway between the west coast of Africa and the Lesser Antilles. This system is producing a large area of showers and thunderstorms that continues to show some signs of organization. Environmental conditions appear favorable for development, and a tropical depression is likely to form during the next few days while the system moves west-northwest at about 20 miles an hour. Interest in the Windward and Leeward Islands should closely monitor this system. In the next 5 days, there is a very high likelihood of development as the system heads off to the west-northwest. That would be, I think it's going to be a tropical cyclone before it arrives to the tropical Atlantic, or before it arrives to the Caribbean. So now let's take a look at the Northeast for severe weather, where there is an enhanced risk right now. We'll go over to the 12Z 3-kilometer NAM, if you will. Shimmy on over to that. It shows you the trough, 500 millibars, 40 to 50 knots there in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. And there's that trough centered over Hudson Bay and eastern Canada with a belt of pretty strong westerlies along its southern and southeastern periphery. Cyclonic curvature as well. Definitely bringing a pretty substantial severe weather event across the Northeast. The shape of the trough doesn't lead to a very robust low-level jet. You've got about 20 knots out of the due west there. Not a lot of directional shear between 500 and 850. That's definitely leading this to be more of a wind, big-time straight-line wind threat. But that 2% area for tornadoes does exist across New Hampshire, Vermont there, and Maine, where you get a little bit stronger low-level winds, a low-level jet pushing 30 knots out of the west-southwest there ahead of that trough. But definitely not a lot of directional shear between 500 and 850. First glance, it definitely does look like a damaging wind event up here in the Northeast. We're looking at the 12Z 3-kilometer NAM. This is your 0 to 3-kilometer EHI. Definitely showing an eruption of storms here along that front. Relatively early, those will develop by 18 to 19Z. So by early afternoon here, those storms develop across upstate New York, all the way back through western New York, where you get even more veered flow, more of a damaging wind threat out there. Definitely some severe storms developing over to the higher terrain there of central northern Vermont and New Hampshire, and spreading east across Maine as well. Dew points, plenty of dew points there. Dew points into the low 70s across the Northeast. So from a moisture standpoint, definitely looks like there is plenty of moisture and instability for severe weather. But overall, across the Northeast, those surface winds are out of the west-southwest as well. Similar direction as 850 and 500 going up through the atmosphere. Not a ton of a directional shear, if any, out there. But there is plenty of speed shear going from 10 knots out of the west-southwest to 40 knots at 500, about 30 to 40 knots of bulk shear up here. Is supportive of some transient supercell structures. But overall, these storms are really going to have to peel off that line and turn hard right to really have a sustained supercell threat. Let's look at some of these traditional severe weather parameters here. Plenty of Cape with those low 70s dew points, even up into the higher terrain of Vermont here, pushing 3,000 surface-based Cape. And these storms are going to form along this west to east oriented frontal boundary here. Subtle shift in wind direction should lead to some subtle convergence along this boundary as well. And decent Cape extends all the way back into western New York as well. And even across coastal Maine, you've got Capes in excess of 2,000. Synoptic scale warm front here lifting up into central Maine, southern Quebec as well. Not a very strong surface low with this system. Looking at the bulk shear at 19Z, the bulk shear does increase right along that frontal boundary, even pushing 40 knots up here. Higher bulk shear across Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine could lead to some embedded supercell structures within that environment, hence the 2% risk for tornadoes up there. And look at these supercell storms developing across northern Vermont relatively early in the afternoon, even closer to the midday hour, passing pretty close to Mount Washington. It would be an awesome day to be on top of Mount Washington with the embedded supercell storms and severe weather. The photographs aren't bad, even though you have unidirectional flow between the surface, 850 and 500. It does look like a straight line photograph, but the potential of a due easterly storm motion here at about 30 to 40 knots could squeeze out a little bit of storm relative helicity there, about 160 or so in the 0 to 3 kilometer layer. But that's a borderline photograph for supercell storms and tornadoes, which is why there is that 2% risk up here for these storms. Those storms will form off to the east across central and southern Maine as well. Straight line photographs here, but if you can get a right mover, especially one that moves a little bit south of east, then you can squeeze out a little bit more storm relative helicity. There is a little bit more directional shear in Maine, going from a due southwesterly surface wind at 10 knots with a 850 wind west-southwesterly at 25 to 30 knots, and then increasing to 50 knots almost out of the due west at 500, and an abundance of low-level Cape there with temperatures warming up into the upper 80s across southern Maine. So there could be a couple tornadoes across central and southern Maine, hence that 2% risk. And it does look like these supercells are going to develop near the midday hour, maybe into early afternoon across central Vermont, central New Hampshire across the higher terrain, and then you get more of a linear configuration further west across central and western New York. And the 3 kilometer NAM is picking up on more of a supercellular mode here from New Hampshire into southern Maine with that 40 knots of bulk shear. Likely splitting supercells. You'll definitely see some left splits favored out here as well. But I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple of tornado warnings across southern Maine with this system. Central New Hampshire as well. Could see a couple of those tornado warnings. We're looking at the 3 kilometer NAM. We're about to look at the HRRR model. But you can see the stronger 850 winds are actually behind that convective line and behind that front. Just a bit out ahead of the front. You get about 20 to 30 knots out of the southwest. Could get a little bit of backing of that low-level jet into southern Maine. But overall, this definitely looks like a windbag event to me. And you can see that supercell composite is a little bit suppressed because of the lack of directional shear out there. Relatively straight line photographs despite decent Cape and deep moisture. But if I were to target anywhere, it would be here in southwestern Maine. That's where I think that there is a best chance of an isolated tornado or two. A little bit more backing of those low-level winds, An abundance of 3 kilometer cape, low level cape there, but still you get these straight line photographs with 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 5 and 6 kilometer winds being about the same direction. Straight line photograph here. You're really going to need a hard right mover somehow, some type of a terrain influence, a mesoscale accident, or an intense mesocyclone to squeeze out some of that wind shear up there to get a tornado threat. But there's definitely going to be quite a bit of wind reports up here in the northeast. Boy, the HRRR shows a lot less wind shear out there for these storms. It looks like mainly a straight line wind threat across this enhanced risk in the northeast. But again, southern Maine, there is a chance of some supercell storms. They may interact with a sea breeze out here as well. Could be a mesoscale accident. Looks like between about 19 and 21 Z, 3, 4, 5 p.m. You're going to get these supercells rolling off the higher terrain. White Mountains out here, the green and white mountains, Vermont and New Hampshire will see some beautiful storms. The HRRR is also showing maybe even a couple transient supercell storms across upstate New York. But this is where I would target in Maine. It's possible an outflow boundary could reinforce this sea breeze front as well. It's going to require a mesoscale accident like that to somehow back that low-level flow out ahead of this. But southwestern Maine, I could see a couple of tornado warnings popping out of this. Even more westerlies at the surface, though, being indicated here by the HRRR, a less favorable environment for tornadoes than is being indicated by the 3 kilometer NAM. But if these approach the coastline here near Portland and to the east of Portland, south central Maine, I could see these interacting with the sea breeze out there. There is sufficient bulk shear for supercell storms with 30 to 40 knots of 0 to 6 kilometer bulk shear out here, despite westerly winds from the surface all the way up to the mid-levels of the atmosphere. But it's possible we could get a little bit of a meso low as well with this. Maybe some backing. They're right along the immediate coastline where that sea breeze front's located. Could squeeze out a mesoscale accident. See a little bit of backing there right along the immediate coastline. But some maritime, those cool sea surface temperatures up there for this time of year off the coast of Maine lead to a bit of an inversion. But as those storms interact with that sea breeze front, I could see there being a couple of tornadoes out there across south central Maine. Definitely keep an eye on that. If you live Portland and a little bit off to the east of Portland, including central, northern Vermont and New Hampshire, if I were targeting anywhere, it'd be right in this area, probably near to the northwest of Portland, intercepting these things as they come out of the higher terrain, and then as they get a little bit closer to the coastline, there could be the potential for a mesoscale accident and maybe a quick tornado up there. But the HRRR, even in the northeast, really mixes out those dew points. So it looks like it has a dry bias, even in the northeast with that deep moisture, with those dew points into the low 70s, as is being indicated by the 3 kilometer NAM. Let's take a look at the surface analysis up there. Oh, we do have a 72 ob there. Southern New York, at least. There's that enhanced risk. Already a mesoscale discussion up here now. Severe thunderstorm watch is likely. Looks like that's a newer mesoscale discussion that just came out. There it is. Mainly wind gusts. 1 or more severe thunderstorm watches likely will be needed across Vermont, New Hampshire, large portion of Maine as well. Models are showing relatively early initiation of those storms, especially across northern Vermont by about 19 Z. Already starting to initiate across western New York here. But look at all these westerly winds. It's definitely going to take some type of a mesoscale accident near the coastline of Maine to squeeze out any tornadoes. Not much in the way of directional shear. Maybe a little bit of a terrain influence up the Hudson River Valley there with a little bit of backing. But it's going to be all speed shear contribution for these storms. Maybe the potential for a mesoscale accident there in Maine, closer to 2021 Z as those storms come out of Vermont and New Hampshire. You can see the effect of that sea breeze front maybe backing a little bit of those surface winds right along that boundary And it's possible that as those supercell storms come out of northern New Hampshire and move a little bit closer to coastal Maine, right near the nose of the instability axis as well. See that instability axis punching in to southwestern Maine? That's where I'd be watching. But the storm relative helicity here, 0 to 1 kilometer SRH, is very limited because of that lack of directional shear here across the northeast. That's why it's creating relatively borderline low-level shear. But about 19 to 21 Z, storms will erupt. By about 19 Z, should be some severe storms near the Burlington area, across northern Vermont, back across central New York as well, maybe even back toward the Syracuse area, across northern New Hampshire, and that'll slide into central New Hampshire and then potentially move into southwestern Maine by about 3, 4, 5 p.m. And maybe that sea breeze out there could create enough of a mesoscale accident to generate more in the way of severe weather. Let's take a look now at the Radar Omega app here and see some of those storms initiating in real time. It is at 11 o'clock, 11:15 out there in the East Coast. And we already have these storms initiating across western New York. And this is what has caused the SPC to drop that, to issue that mesoscale discussion here. And we will see storms initiating across northern Vermont as well the next 1 to 2 hours. These are likely to intensify across western New York. Will produce some damaging wind gusts. Definitely will need a severe thunderstorm watch for that location. Across northern Vermont, watching upstream, you're getting some convection firing up here across the Adirondacks of northern New York, and I do expect rapid development of severe storms as well across northern Vermont, Montpelier, Burlington. Definitely need to keep an eye out over the next 1 to 2 hours as those storms develop. Main target area down here though, southwestern Maine. I think that looks best for that severe weather, for a non-zero threat of a tornado with that 2% risk. Maybe as supercells come out of northern New Hampshire, move into southwestern Maine, and then could be a mesoscale accident or two. But for the most part, strong damaging winds are going to be the main threat with these storms. And storms are developing first here across central New York to the northwest of Syracuse, to the east of Watertown, moving into the Adirondacks here as well. So it looks like severe thunderstorm watches are on the way out there for the northeast with that enhanced risk. We've got those 2 tropical disturbances out in the open Atlantic to keep a very close eye on, especially 97L, which is forecast to become a tropical depression in the next 48 hours, maybe even a tropical storm or a hurricane on approach to the Lesser Antilles. But that lead system looks less likely to develop into a tropical cyclone as a weakening open wave moving over the Lesser Antilles right now with some heavy rain and gusty winds. So thank you everybody for joining me for this live weather briefing. I'll continue these weather briefings to keep you updated on the tropics, and it looks like the middle to later portion of next week we could have a tropical cyclone in the Gulf, especially if you believe the GFS or the hurricane models as well are taking that tropical system in that direction, strengthening it into a Category 1 or Category 2 hurricane as it moves into the northern Caribbean, just to the south of the Greater Antilles. So thank you everybody for joining me for this live weather briefing, breaking down the tropics and the severe weather threat, damaging straight line winds across portions of the northeast. And then we've got these dual disturbances out in the Atlantic. No reason to panic by any means across the Gulf Coast or even the East Coast right now with this system. Very easily, 97L could encounter that dry air, even in the wake of the lead tropical wave with such a monster Bermuda High off to the north. It could also track directly over Hispaniola or even Cuba, that higher terrain, which would tend to tear it apart. And many of the global ensembles have it anywhere from a Yucatan storm to dying out over the Greater Antilles to even recurving north and then missing the East Coast completely, wrapping around the western edge of that Bermuda High. And all of it depends on how intense that western lobe or the Bermuda High is as it meanders toward the southeastern U.S. So I'm going to keep you guys updated with these live briefings. Thank you for tuning in to my weather reports. I may do some radar, live radar break-ins for the Northeast later on today, especially if we can get some supercells turning right into that wind shear. But overall, a lack of directional shear should lead to a relatively low tornado threat across the Northeast and mainly a damaging straight line wind threat. Tomorrow I'm getting some work done on Dominator 4, meeting up with Sasha and Critter. And the game plan is to get a roof rack on the Dominator 4 so I can mount the Dominator weather station. I'm also working on adding a permanent rod where I can mount an RM Young anemometer on Dominator 4. And we're going to be doing some waterproofing with Flex Seal products as well tomorrow. So I'll be going live during that as well, getting Dominator 4 ready for hurricane season. So thank you for tuning in to this live update. I'll keep an eye on everything, and we'll continue to go live as we are tracking 97L. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Never stop chasing.